Hello again, dear listeners. Welcome to a new episode of the StressOut Project podcast series, which is a project funded by the European Union within the Erasmus Plus program. This project, as you surely already know, has the main goal of generating tools to facilitate the prevention and management of stress, both for individuals on a personal level and for employees in companies. The idea is that through these podcasts, we can spread awareness about what our tools are and what the benefits are against this increasingly pressing problem within the workplace. In today's episode, we are going to address precisely the theme of prevention and management, but from the perspective of the application of emotional intelligence and rational thinking. For this, we have the presence of two professionals with extensive and long-standing experience in the management and leadership of people in companies. Today we have with us Nuria Jiménez, Director of People and Cooperative Culture at the financial institution CAIXA POPULAR. Hello, Nuria. Nuria also has extensive experience in human resources consulting in national and multinational companies. She is a psychologist by the University of Valencia and specializes in leadership development and talent management. Nuria, to give you a slightly more personal detail, describes herself as someone who likes to learn because, as Antoine de Saint-Exupéry says, what is essential is invisible to the eyes. We also have today on our podcast the presence of África Valldecabres, Director of Human Resources at DACSA Group. Hello, África. Good morning. África is also a psychologist from the University of Valencia and has extensive experience in leading and managing people through her time in various national and multinational companies. And as África likes to say, I always prefer to work in a team because, essentially, I like people. Welcome to both of you. Thank you for making time in your busy schedules. Thank you, Nuria, for letting us use these magnificent facilities of CAIXA POPULAR. Well, let's start talking about the topic.
Perfect. A fascinating topic that brings the three of us together. Thank you very much, first of all, Manu, for inviting us, and it's a pleasure to be here.
To situate our listeners so they understand well what we are going to discuss, could you briefly summarize what we can understand by emotional intelligence and what are the benefits for people's well-being?
Yes, emotional intelligence is defined in many ways. For me, the easiest way to understand for everyone I deal with on these issues is the ability or capacity to recognize and manage emotions, their duration and intensity both in oneself and in others.
It can be complementary to what is cognitive intelligence, which is somewhat related to more academic aspects such as memorization, language proficiency, or problem solving. I would define it exactly the same. And it is true that if we want to delve a little more into Goleman's model, which is the most famous and the one that really popularized it, we have 5 aspects included. Emotional self-awareness.
It's kind of what she said, being aware of what emotions I'm feeling right now according to the context I'm living in.
Knowing how to recognize it, how to manage it, how to channel and dose it. Self-motivation, which sometimes is not well known, but it is true that an emotionally intelligent person is capable of self-motivating. Empathy and social skills are related to managing others. To add a bit more and delve into the definition.
What benefit or impact does being an emotionally intelligent person have on me?
A very simple observation: if we can recognize and control the intensity and duration of emotions, it is evident that when they are disproportionately negative, you are able to cut off that situation much sooner and in a better way. Just as also managing the appropriateness of the frustration that an overly positive emotion can provide.
When a person is emotionally intelligent with themselves and with others, in the end, their personal well-being is greater for sure. The benefit would be this, for me, the most noteworthy.
We have already made clear the part about emotional intelligence and the benefits it has for people, but it's also relevant to people's emotional lives from the perspective of having a healthier life, relating to the management of thoughts, and surely having rational thoughts that help me in some way to achieve that emotional well-being. As far as I know, this is not as widespread, not as developed as the concept of emotional intelligence. From your point of view, how does rational thinking help improve people's well-being? Or in other words, how can irrational thinking negatively impact people's well-being?
Well, I have to say that I have an advantage because the school where I studied, the university, even though it was several years ago, actually
trains people when you specialize in clinical psychology. It is this approach that you delve into, and it has its origin in what we call rational emotive behavior therapy, REBT. It is by Albert Ellis.
He is the one who founded it, and his collaborators and his school are the ones who have spread it. So Ellis and his team
Proposed that individuals, to interpret the events we are exposed to automatically and negatively, use irrational thoughts that are based on the learnings and experiences each person has throughout their life journey. These thoughts are often catastrophists with negative anticipation, perfectionists, or have low frustration tolerance and condemnation.
And this type of thoughts negatively impact because they connect with high-level emotions, destructive such as anxiety, depression, guilt, or anger. What can we say? That on the contrary, when a person has rational thoughts, they are logical, flexible, objective, relative, based on evidence, and this ultimately generates moderate emotions, even if the adverse event is the same.
When you transform rational thought into rational, the consequence, that is how you feel, changes radically.
A bit like how I would sum it up. I'm not sure if I explain myself well or if I can add anything else, but I think learning to think well is fundamental.
Indeed, it is another training because thoughts provoke emotions and therefore alter the behavior you are going to have either subsequently or immediately. So to the extent that people are able to approach situations, training rationality or moderating their thoughts by trying to speculate on a realistic, not futuristic basis, they address problems more calmly and with much more moderate emotions, which allow them to approach solutions for themselves or others.
I find Africa's contribution very valuable because when there is, in addition, a figure in companies that is a manager who also has to manage a bit of conflicts and people, well, of course, this skill is fundamental.
Yes, the truth is that it helps me, and I understand that it helps the listeners as well to hear you, because right now we can all remember moments in our life when low tolerance for frustration has guided our interpretation of reality, and therefore the emotions we've had, thoughts of perfectionism, thoughts of catastrophism, which are those automatisms that somehow appear without us wanting them to, but that condition a lot how we live, and as you were saying, Nuria, often prevent us from enjoying situations too. I think the positive side is interesting, that a person with this type of thinking is not just that they may have negative, harmful emotions, but rather does not enjoy positive situations. This is an interesting topic.
In fact, you can be completely blocked and overwhelmed and not appreciate the good things you have when you are in this situation.
In these self-demands or with these irrational thoughts of anticipating the future, this is going to happen no matter what. If you think in your head that I'm going to get fired, well, it's like you will feel as if you were going to be fired. And maybe that isn't based on logic or reality because you have imagined it, and the brain doesn't distinguish if it's true or not true. Based on what you think, you feel, and if you aren't aware of that and don't work on it, well, imagine that sometimes that's how it goes for us.
Let's go directly into the world of work. Let's go to your companies, and before looking a bit at the application of this emotional intelligence and managing rational thoughts, although Africa gave us a little preview with the topic of conflicts. So I would like you to tell us that, to give us some context in your companies with the issue of work-related stress and burnout. Obviously, there are a lot of studies now. There's a very strong social trend regarding well-being, health, and stress. It has become a serious problem at the European level, especially because of the reports we handle in the companies and in yours. Is this macro trend in health that exists in Europe reflected? Is it reflected later in the management of the companies?
Yes, indeed, it is clearly reflected, and it is regrettable and concerning the impact that mental health has on absenteeism nowadays and will have in the future, because these statistics that we manage at the level of European figures at least suggest that by 2030, 1 out of every 3 people will take leave due to mental health reasons. This very morning, I heard a statistic on the radio, on Cadena Ser specifically, where they said that only 17% of people who have a disorder or recognize a mental health problem report it within companies. So this concealment of mental health issues, the most common of which is negative stress, is increasing absenteeism not only for that reason, but also the type of absenteeism that occurs as a decision by the worker in the face of the same circumstance between going to work or not. I give the example of someone who has a slight fever when they got up and they know that they have a complicated day, that they would like to resolve the things ahead of them, that they are a responsible person, just as responsible as anyone else. There are people who, in that same situation, have a decision-making process. Fleeing from the work context, there are people who have a process of decision, of overcoming and approaching the work context. There is a disorder, a perception of what is going to happen, a projection and anticipation of the day ahead that makes you decide. And at least in the industrial sector, from the year 2019 until now, absenteeism has increased by 40%. Figures that directly affect business, labor costs, and especially the environment and people, because behind there is a real mental health problem that is not recognized, not verbalized, and therefore sometimes also difficult to manage within companies.
I have to say that I work in a financial entity, which is a credit union where the workers are partners and owners. I think this detail is important in this context.
If you ask me, Manu, if there is stress or burnout here at CAIXA Popular, well, I believe that every organization,
It definitely has some basic levels of stress that, depending on the type of company and business, can be higher or lower. Africa has rightly noted that in the industrial environment, she mentioned figures that are truly alarming. Currently, at CAIXA Popular, the level of absenteeism we have is quite low. If we don't count paternities and maternities, we're talking about 2.5. It's quite low. It's true that it influences the skills that we have internally, but what is clear is that in the service sector, in the banking sector, in the financial sector, there is a lot of competitiveness. We are directly attending to clients, and logically, it is a sector where the impact that stress can have may be significant. That being said,
what we do here basically is the figures count,
and all the studies are alarming. It's clear that mental health is being worked on and data is being provided. I completely agree with Africa that it's something that tends to be denied, it's not put on the table. It is masked. We are increasingly working on it in society in general. Here we have had psychological help for the past 4 years as part of the management we do for the well-being of the press to prevent this stress. And I think that's where really we must influence, right? In that part of saying, oh, how can I prevent that from happening?
Yes, Yasmeda, I find it very interesting, especially the topic of concealment that Africa mentioned. Do you think that behind this concealment there is still a strong feeling or a strong sense of stigma? Do people believe that mental health is a stigmatizing issue?
It has a clear connection to the concept of mental weakness, of ability, of vulnerability, of being less strong, that there are other people who in the same situation handle the life scenario calmly, right? The only positive thing I see is that indeed it's much more linked to age, and therefore younger people do go to the psychologist and talk about it like going to the hairdresser. So it makes me happy to think that all the colleagues in the company who tell me, well, I'm going because I suddenly needed it and it has been very good for me, are usually the younger people. But well, that generation is coming that has stopped stigmatizing.
I fully share Africa's opinion in this case, and I do believe that now there is even a push in the media. There is a push to stop, seeing it as something negative, right? When a person has trouble facing a situation, whether it's a job, a boss you don't like, the pressure of results and so on, so that you can go to a professional. Here we try to give it normality.
to it. And in fact, I increasingly hear that even though we have this service completely confidentially and logically, we do not have data on who goes and who doesn't, because that is how it is set up, no? But I can tell you that more and more people mention it naturally. Well, I've gone to a psychologist, I've already tried it, it's worked very well for me. I've been going for a year with him, and he has helped me a lot to adapt to this fast-paced sector, the changes we tackle here, the new projects. When I feel overwhelmed, well, it helps me a lot. And then let's not forget one thing, right? We are who we are, and it also depends a lot on how we have experienced it, right? Personally, I believe there is hope in those young people, and more this is spreading, and I think soon we will be like in other countries where people will go to the psychologist, just like when we go to specialists.
What is being done from our companies? And to situate again, what role does emotional intelligence and thinking play as a possible tool when working on these issues?
If we focus on the topic of emotional intelligence and rational thinking in companies, well, we are indeed addressing the detection of these skills from the selection processes from the start, where a candidate goes to a company interested in working there, by proposing interviews where we contextualize situations of what their day-to-day would be like. Normally stressful, discovering what their coping behaviors are, trying to verify that they have them. Throughout the professional career, the journey of a working person in a company, then we clearly recognize what the vital moments will be that will accompany that working person in their personal life. Well, according to age, they will surely have children at certain points in their life and will lose their parents at others. So the vital moments of stress are quite clear, and we also incorporate in the training programs the training of these skills available to everyone, much more specifically. And since mental health is something that first has caused an important change in society, as we have also made available to everyone working in the company, well, platforms with training resources, with talks, with brief, very accurate sessions, always ensuring that they are conducted by real qualified professional psychologists, right? And to which they also have access through video conference or chat, and the possibility of having, well, personal sessions to a certain extent when it exceeds what is a minor coping issue. Well, these same psychologists refer them to another type of intervention, but talking about mental health, talking about how we all need those supports during our professional life. It also brings closer the possibility of people seeking those solutions.
Here, indeed, we have it incorporated, don't we? You try to ensure that people are free, emotionally intelligent from the start, from when you want to incorporate them here, because you know it will be a basic skill. And more so for us, since we work in the service sector, we advise clients. Social skills and these abilities contribute a lot. From there, we measure items like stress management and the ability to disconnect. Well, we have measured year by year what that comes out for us, and we have it segmented. Therefore, it allows us to establish more tailored solutions for groups. We would like to reach each person individually. For now, we address this through psychological support if someone has something or not, but we try to make the person aware that knowing how to disconnect is important, because otherwise stress will catch up with you. Or, for example, managing negative stress is very important. And if you don't know how to do it, we will help you with everything that Africa mentioned. Of course, we have tools from training. We also have individual support or customized individual training itineraries in these kinds of key subjects. And finally, certainly emotional intelligence in both in the evaluation of the annual performance that is done, which we call the annual evaluation here. From performance and professional growth, there is a skill we call emotional and relational intelligence. This requires you each year to think about how you are doing in that aspect, the content of your life, and where you want to go, if what you have is enough or not. And that is discussed between the manager and the collaborator. And from there, well, they can also address, well, the support that the person might need. For example, And certainly to delve into the topic of that we a little more, right? In the end, the most important thing is that we as people are aware that it is not the adverse events. It is not the events that cause us emotional disturbances, but the way we interpret them. And that is something we need to get into our heads. Therefore, if you
But
work
excuse me, Nuria, do you train for that? I mean, do you develop training programs where that ability, that skill is trained?
Look, for example, I'm going to give you an example that is very, very in a training program that we are conducting here, 12 years already. Wow, it's a program that the 7 habits of highly effective people are known. In habit 1, which is being proactive specifically in the tools, so that they work on being proactive and not letting themselves go, not reacting, but responding to circumstances. We've been working for 12 years on how to face that in this way, in a rational and not irrational manner. With that, you realize that important paradigm shift. What happens
In theory, and according to REBT, rational emotive behavior therapy, it does not matter.
How do you interpret that? And what rational thoughts do you have about it? It doesn't mean that this is happy, that with that everything will be happy and life will be rosy. It's not like that. Life has good things, bad things, regular things. What these tools help you with in these training programs or through these other things we mentioned, the talks, the training courses and such, they help you first change that paradigm, and from there it's already your responsibility and within your circle of influence how you face that adversity. Let's say it is true that humans have a resistance to change, Manu, and in that I won't. It is not all rosy, it's difficult. You take a training course and some people apply the contents and some don't. Well, it depends on what motivates me. It depends on the need I have at that moment. It depends on my context. It depends on whether I believe it or not. That does influence, of course, but the person who is interested and wants to improve in this aspect, there are, of course, tools, and these two are basic, in my opinion.
The truth is, it's comforting to hear you, because I'm imagining people listening to us who might see that, might be in a complex situation of stress or burnout that has been identified, and that may see that there are tools, that there are interventions in companies, but also on a personal level that can allow you to change your situation. I think it's comforting to listen to you. I also get the feeling that you are establishing a direct relationship, right? That is someone who has work stress or burnout through good training in emotional intelligence or rational thinking will eliminate in a very, very large percentage, as if it is a very personal issue of how we think. But that relationship is always direct. Could there be some nuance? It also depends a bit on the contextual conditions of the company, workload.
Of course, I believe there are aspects that are objectively negative, and that 90% of the population would interpret them in the same way. We also cannot rely on the ability to interpret reality one way or another. Emotion and people's responses, there is a very clear effect that I think is well known, which is that people, for example, leave companies because of their bosses. Precisely for those positions where the influence on others is much greater, which is when you lead teams, well, companies should closely monitor the capacity and emotional intelligence of these people, their leadership style, to make life simpler or impossible for others. So yes, having a very clear leadership model where that is a requirement for a promotion to a managerial position also helps, because that boss, it's clear that there are bosses and bosses, just like there are bad situations or good situations. It's not just about people's ability.
Taking it to the extreme, if a person can't stand their boss, then what they need to do is manage and not be with them. And what they do is either leave or talk about it and look for a change, whatever it may be indeed. Or as if you work in an environment without natural light, or you are in conditions you do not have the tools to do your job, or they ask you for an amount of work that is excessive and you can't do it in the time you have assigned. Of course, there are issues that they will undoubtedly fall for that negative stress. What I am saying is that ultimately the person is the one who has the freedom to choose that response to those circumstances, the freedom to choose it, to propose a change, to seek changes, either inside or outside. And what I always say is one thing, and that is,
The bosses have, or the managers, well, I wouldn't say a lot, but a lot of responsibility in this. Of course, as Africa says, we have to monitor those qualities they have. And that's why they are also measured through leadership surveys, which boss has more turnover or less turnover. This ultimately becomes apparent, right? Here in our culture, it also happens to us that, for example, someone experiences a very high level of stress due to the responsibility, hyper-responsibility of being a manager. And it reaches a point where they negatively stress themselves and others. And what we must do is be alert from our areas and say, let's see, maybe we've gone too far. This person doesn't have to be here. Maybe they don't have to go. I'm not saying that, but still where he was, because it is true that the harm that can be done in this sense is greater, and totally agreed, right? That's the key, to find good directors and good people who are beside people who help in that communication, in that leadership. Well, it's not always easy for us. I don't know if Africa agrees with me because it's difficult. The demands we have are high, but that's what we have to aim for.
Could you give us an example of a situation you've experienced in your company now or at another time in your professional career, a situation where emotional intelligence or rational thinking was decisive in handling a situation with very high stress or a lot of tension?
Here in Valencia, a very significant tragedy has just happened. Why does one person face the same tragedy with such stress that it has paralyzed their life, while others are already practically back to normal life under the same circumstances exactly 24 days later? Where is the key?
It is a very dramatic situation for the province of Valencia and for all the people who work in neighboring the city, just as we had at the time of the COVID-19 pandemic. And we clearly observed how the styles of facing this situation are just as tough, and how we were able to help with leadership that was consistent, calm, serene, and firm, so that some people found in another that example, that way of managing, losing some irrational fears, facing reality, well, with the information we had. And I do think that there is a very evident event there. For me, the most evident example where I apply emotional intelligence or rational thinking is in conflict management, both from the people who seek a solution with their leaders or with their peers, and vice versa, like the managers who come looking for a solution for their team because they have a truly personal conflict, a way of understanding work or life or whatever that makes their day-to-day very, very difficult. That's where most frequently in my career, in my particular case, I help people understand that there is no absolute truth, that there are many points of view, and I try to help them to bring positions closer.
I am especially sensitive right now with the Dana that happened in Valencia because it has affected us 34% of our business. There are 14 offices that are more affected with their teams and that directly by the area of the 70 towns. This is specifically our impact. But well, how are we dealing with this? For me, it is let's see, where am I applying myself? Well, definitely the 5 I've done. Initially, those aspects of emotional intelligence, I personally try to lead by example. I believe Africa does too, because I know her well. So if you don't have self-control, if you don't have empathy, if you don't use all your social skills to help these people at this moment, then we're not doing well. That's for starters. I'm going to give you a very specific example. What happened just yesterday? Yesterday, we gathered the 14 affected office branches after this first emergency plan until we were able to have access, mobility, and now we have all of them open. Though some are precarious, the centers and such, in record time. And yesterday, we invited them here to talk. At a work session, we spent the whole afternoon with them, the entire management team, where we informed them firsthand. They already knew many things, right? And we listened to them to see what more we can do to help everyone in all aspects of the business, of the clients, of the people, of the teams. And we made decisions on the spot. I think this, if you don't have that rationality and that emotional intelligence, and you are strong and you are firm and you set an example and seek those balances and communicate them well, then these things are difficult because in the end it's a catastrophe that happened. And it's not the same to see it on TV, even though it was shocking, than to be there experiencing it. I think there's nothing more to add.
I would like us to focus a little more on the personal side now. Imagine that I am one of your employees and have asked to meet with you one morning, that you give me 5 minutes, and suddenly I sit in your office and tell you that I think I am experiencing a strong burnout episode that has been going on for a long time, that I have decided not to hide it, that I have decided to talk about it with people, that I am seeing a psychologist outside, and that it's time to discuss it at the company because the situation is becoming unsustainable for me. What immediate advice would you give me? How would you help me start to face this situation from the very first minute?
I think the first question I would ask that person, if it were you talking to yourself, would be, if you've come to me, it's because you're expecting something. What do you want? What do you need from me?
I would ask you, how can I help you? That is the question I always ask. There is always something you can do for the other person.
Would you try to understand me a little better rather than just giving me advice directly? First listen, right? We're going back to social skills. We're going back to empathy, right?
Man, of course, we need to explore a bit what has happened, how you feel, provide calmness so that they can express what they might need, give confidentiality to the conversation, total confidentiality. Of course, prioritizing their physical and mental health above everything else at that moment is what I believe should be done. We are not doctors.
I don't know if you agree, but it is like that. So you have to respect that process, and at the same time, that person, first thank them, right? It's just, that is also, I always do it when a person tells you that. It is an act of bravery that should also be appreciated. And well, from there, with that listening and those open questions, I am convinced that something good will definitely come out of that conversation. For the company and for him, and for me too, in this case.
I would also say that we are fortunate to work in organizations or companies that allow us to adopt this role and, as Nuria said, prioritize a conversation without any doubt, where the person comes first and then everything else.
A stroke of luck to have that focus that they allow you. At some point in the conversation, I've been tempted to ask if the executives who share a management committee with you are equally aware and pushing this project. I assume they are because they let you do it, right? I assume they are, although like everywhere, there will be facilitators and barriers. But well, it is comforting to hear that there are organizations that move from rhetoric to reality and action in a clear and evident way, as you are conveying now. We are now reaching the end of this podcast, and Manuel, thank you again for being here, for lending us a little bit of your time. I think it's clear that mental health is a very relevant topic. It already is, but as Africa mentioned, it will be much more so by 2030. The new generations are more accustomed to talking about this in a much more open way. And I think that from what you've mentioned, mental health and the concealment and stigma behind it somehow is going to make it difficult, or is making it difficult for people to open up and begin to work on these issues that have a direct impact on the company's results, on indicators like absenteeism, that have personal effects on how people face certain situations, such as fleeing from, I get up in the morning, how I face the situation, I have a complicated day. As you were saying, Africa, I feel a little unwell, is the perfect excuse. Am I not going to work today? Well, that depends a lot on how I can internally manage those thoughts and what skills I have in that regard. I think you have also conveyed a message of optimism that you can get through this, that you're in a situation, you can change your situation, because there will be people who can lend you a hand, because you need to know and have information and be aware of these sorts of things, and that there are tools at your disposal and that you can change that profile, right? Because I understand that this is also fluctuating, right? There will be times when we will feel more like this and others when we will be more confident. So in the times when we are feeling lower, let's see what we can work on to change that profile, right? So they also highlight that action can be taken from people policies in organizations, from before people enter the organization, through the selection process, trying to anticipate certain situations in which that person it may replicate in the future when working in the company. Through training programs, we try to develop certain skills also through evaluation, right, of the people in organizations. And finally, highlight that mental health is not only a topic that depends on people, which it largely does, how we do it, but there are a series of organizational factors that greatly influence, right, this phenomenon. And you were directly talking about leadership as a fundamental topic to address all of this, right? We take your advice. I don't know if you have anything else to add there.
What an excellent reformulation, Manu. I think it has been a magnificent summary.
I believe that from the companies, which are important entities in society, we can help people a lot.
Well, then, thank you very much again. Speaking to our listeners, thank you for being attentive to this episode. Please do not miss the upcoming episodes, the podcasts that we will be doing within this StressOut project. Remember that you can follow us through our website, stressout-project.eu. And you also know that you can access all the podcasts and all the training materials we are going to make through the app that we are going to create and that you can download. Of course, we're also on social media, both on Facebook and LinkedIn. Nothing more, just say goodbye and thank you for being here with us.